How do you stand steady when your world crumbles in your own living room? I'm Jazelle Johnson, 42, a sales manager in Atlanta, Georgia, where the oak-lined streets and humid air make every heartbreak feel heavier. My life was a careful balance, decent job, solid savings, a heart still daring to hope, until Ryan, my husband, turned it upside down. That morning, his smirk cut deeper than his words as he waved divorce papers like a trophy, saying, "I don't need you anymore, Jazelle. Dad's bank account has $500 million. I'm set for life." My stomach twisted. Ryan had always been selfish, dodging chores, flashing grins to dodge accountability. But this? He'd married me, played the devoted husband, all while waiting for his father to die so he could cash in. Worse, he was spitting on my father-in-law's name, a man who'd treated me like family, gone just days ago. I stood there, fists clenched, the urge to scream burning my throat. But a quiet voice, maybe his, whispered, "Stay calm, Jazelle." So I snatched the papers, signed them with a trembling hand, and said, "File them yourself. Send my stuff when you're done." Walking out past the manicured lawn of that big Atlanta house, anger and relief churned inside me. Ryan thought he'd won, but he was about to learn the hard way. His $500 million dream was a lie, and I knew it. The air was thick that morning, the kind of sticky Georgia heat that clings to your skin and makes every step feel like wading through molasses. I'd been up since dawn, still raw from my father-in-law's funeral, his warm laughter now just a memory echoing in that red brick house. Ryan had been distant all week, but I chalked it up to grief. How wrong I was. He strode into the living room, his usual boyish charm replaced by something cold, calculated. "We're done," he said, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. My heart stopped, not from love lost, but from the betrayal. "You were just the ATM," he added, his voice dripping with triumph. I stuck around until Dad's money came through. I stared at him, my mind racing to piece together the man I thought I knew. The one who'd made me laugh over dive bar beers, who'd held my hand when I cried about my first husband. Was it all a lie? My nails dug into my palms as I fought to keep my voice steady. I wanted to hurl the truth at him, that his father's fortune wasn't what he thought. But I held back. Let him find out the hard way. I'd always prided myself on keeping it together, closing deals with tech execs who'd underestimate a black woman in a boardroom. But this was personal. Ryan's words stung like a slap, not just for me but for his dad, who'd spent his life building community centers, not hoarding wealth. The living room, with its cedar scent and family photos, felt like a stage for his cruelty. I could still see my father-in-law in his recliner, frail but sharp, telling me about his dreams for Atlanta's kids. Ryan hadn't cared about those stories, too busy scrolling his phone, waiting for a payout. As I signed the papers, my hand shook, but my resolve didn't. I wasn't just signing away a marriage, I was cutting loose a weight I'd carried too long. The ink dried and I grabbed my purse, the leather strap cool against my sweaty palm. Stepping outside, the oak trees loomed like silent witnesses, their branches heavy with summer green. I could still hear Ryan's smug chuckle behind me, oblivious to the storm coming his way. My heels clicked on the driveway, each step a mix of fury and freedom. I'd given Ryan everything, my trust, my savings, my hope for a second chance at love, and he'd thrown it away for a fantasy. But I wasn't broken, not this time. I slid into my car, the engine humming to life, and glanced back at the house one last time. Ryan thought he'd played me, but he didn't know the truth his father had shared. That $500 million he was banking on? It was tied up, unreachable, and soon he'd be left with nothing but his own bad choices. I drove off, a sharp laugh escaping me, not because I was cruel, but because justice was already in motion. The days after were a blur of hotel rooms and late-night calls with friends, their voices a lifeline as I tried to make sense of it all. I'd lost my first husband to a freak accident, and now my second to greed. But something felt different this time, lighter. I wasn't the widow drowning in grief or the wife trapped in a lie. I was Jazelle, and I was done being anyone's stepping stone. My father-in-law's memory lingered, his kindness a reminder to stay steady. He'd seen me, not as Ryan's wife, but as someone with fire, someone worth respecting. As I scrolled through condo listings in Midtown, I felt a spark of something new. Hope, maybe, or just the quiet thrill of starting over. Ryan would learn his lesson soon enough, and I'd be far away, building a life that was mine alone. To understand how I ended up walking away from that Atlanta house, you need to know where I started, back when loss was my only companion. 3 years ago, I was 39, happily married to my first husband, Marcus, a quiet construction worker with a laugh that could light up a room. We weren't rich, just content, saving for a modest house in the Atlanta suburbs, dreaming of a backyard where we could sip coffee on lazy Sundays. Then one morning, my phone rang and everything shattered. A car accident on his job site. Marcus didn't make it. The grief was a weight I couldn't shake, heavy as the Georgia humidity, pressing into my chest every time I walked into our apartment. I'd make coffee for 2 out of habit, then stare at the extra mug. The silence deafening. Between his life insurance and a severance package, I ended up with $500,000. It was more money than I'd ever seen, but it felt dirty, like blood money traded for the life we'd planned. My in-laws, sweet folks in their late 70s, insisted I keep it. "You're young, Jazelle," they said. "Use it to start over." I offered to share it with my brother-in-law and his wife, but they took only a small piece, leaving me with the rest. So there I was, widowed, sitting on a fortune, and completely lost. I threw myself into work, pitching software solutions to clients who'd raise eyebrows at my confidence, as if a black woman couldn't close a deal. The days were long, filled with sales targets and PowerPoint slides, but the nights were worse. Coming home to that empty apartment, the walls seemed to close in, the quiet amplifying every memory of Marcus, his work, boots by the door, the way he'd hum off-key while cooking. I wasn't broke, but I was broken, carrying a grief so raw it felt like a second skin. I'd sit on my couch, scrolling through old photos, trying to remember how it felt to laugh without forcing it. Friends tried to pull me out, inviting me to brunches or book clubs, but their cheer felt like static against my numbness. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could make the world less hollow. That's when Ryan Carter walked into my life, like a breeze cutting through the heavy air. Ryan was a sales rep at a partner company, 43, with a boyish grin that hid his rough edges. We'd cross paths at work conferences, trading small talk about clients or the latest tech trends. One day, over coffee at a Marriott in downtown Atlanta, I let it all spill out. Marcus's death, the loneliness, the way I felt like I was just going through the motions. Most people would have squirmed or changed the subject, but Ryan listened, his hazel eyes steady. He cracked a lighthearted joke about his own terrible dating history, saying, "I get dumped faster than a bad Tinder date, Jazelle." It wasn't much, but it made me laugh. A real laugh, for the first time in months. "Your husband was lucky to have you," he added, his voice soft, and I felt a flicker of warmth, like a candle in a dark room. We started meeting up outside work, grabbing drinks at a dive bar in Midtown, talking about everything. Music, childhoods, dreams we'd buried. Ryan opened up about his own life, growing up in Atlanta's shadow of wealth. His father, a real estate developer, had built strip malls across the Southeast, amassing millions but never flaunting it. Ryan's mom left when he was young, chasing a glitzy lifestyle his dad wouldn't bankroll. It left Ryan with a chip on his shoulder, always feeling like he had to prove himself, but never quite measuring up. I didn't see the warning signs then, how his insecurity drove him to charm his way out of responsibility. One night, as we walked along the Beltline, I dropped a crumpled receipt, and he stuffed it into his already bulging wallet, loose change spilling out. "You're like a kid, Ryan," I teased, laughing as he fumbled. "Hey, I'm 43, thank you very much," he shot back, grinning. That moment, small as it was, made me feel alive again, like the hole in my heart was shrinking. Looking back, I see how vulnerable I was, how much I needed someone to fill the void Marcus left. Ryan's charm was like a bandage, covering the wound, but not healing it. I ignored the whispers from friends who thought I was moving too fast, who saw something in Ryan I didn't, yet. My heart was still raw, but it was beating again, and I let myself believe Ryan could be the answer. I didn't know then that his easy smiles hid a colder plan, one that would unravel everything I'd tried to rebuild. As I sat in that hotel room after leaving him, scrolling through condo listings, I thought back to those early days with Ryan, wondering how I missed the cracks in his facade. But maybe I didn't miss them. Maybe I just wanted to believe in something, someone, again. Ryan Carter had a way of making the world feel brighter, like the first sip of sweet tea on a sweltering Atlanta afternoon. Those early days with him were a lifeline, pulling me out of the fog of grief that had settled after Marcus's death. We'd meet at a dive bar in Midtown, the kind with sticky floors and neon signs, where he'd spin stories about his latest sales pitch or some client who thought they knew tech better than him. His laugh was infectious, cutting through my heaviness, and I'd find myself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in what felt like forever. One night, over greasy burgers and cheap beer, he leaned across the table, his hazel eyes catching the dim light. "Jazelle, you're tougher than you think," he said. "Most people would have folded after what you've been through." I shrugged, brushing off the compliment, but it warmed me, like sunlight sneaking through the oak trees outside my apartment. Ryan had a knack for that, saying just enough to make me feel seen, but not so much it felt forced. We started spending more time together, moving from work events to late-night walks along the Beltline, where Atlanta's skyline glittered against the humid night. He'd talk about his childhood, raised in the shadow of his father's real estate empire. His dad, he said, was a workaholic who'd built half the strip malls in Georgia, but never had time for him. His mom was worse, leaving when Ryan was 10, chasing a glitzy life in Miami his dad wouldn't fund. "I was always the kid who didn't fit," he said one evening, kicking a pebble as we walked. "Too loud for dad, not shiny enough for mom." I felt for him, that ache of never being enough. I told him about Marcus, how we'd planned a simple life, how the accident stole it all. Ryan listened, his usual jokes replaced by a quiet nod, and I thought, maybe this guy gets it. But there were hints of something else, little cracks I didn't want to see. Like how he'd dodge questions about his own plans, always vague about his sales job, saying, "It pays the bills, but I'm meant for bigger things." His wallet, stuffed with receipts and loose change, was a running joke between us. "You're a mess, Ryan," I'd tease, watching him fumble to pay for coffee. "Organized chaos, Jazelle?" He'd grin, and I'd laugh, ignoring how that chaos might spill into bigger things. One night, at a barbecue joint in Decatur, he caught me off guard. "Jazelle, we're not getting any younger," he said, his eyes sparkling with that impulsive energy I'd come to love. "Why don't we just get married?" My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face was serious, almost daring. My heart stuttered. Marcus's memory still lingered, his quiet strength a ghost I carried, but Ryan's confidence was like a current, pulling me forward. I hesitated, my mind flashing to friends' warnings. "He's charming, Jazelle, but he's slippery," one had said after meeting him. I brushed it off, chalking it up to their protectiveness. I was 39, widowed and tired of being alone. Ryan made me feel alive, like I could outrun the grief if I just kept moving. "Okay," I said, surprising myself, the words slipping out before I could overthink it. "Let's do it." His grin was wide, triumphant, and for a moment, I felt like we were unstoppable. Then, as we left the restaurant, he dropped a bombshell. "Oh, by the way, I'm living with my dad," he said, casual as if he'd mentioned the weather. "He's been sick, needs help. You cool with that?" My stomach tightened. He'd mentioned his dad before, but not like this, not as a live-in obligation. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Didn't want to scare you off," he shrugged. "Meet him, you'll see. It's no big deal." I wasn't thrilled, but I agreed, hoping it wouldn't change the spark between us. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling, Marcus's old flannel folded on the chair beside me. Was I rushing this? Ryan's charm was undeniable, but there was a recklessness to him, a hunger I couldn't quite place. I pushed the thought away, telling myself I was just scared of starting over. I wanted to believe in Ryan, in the way he made my heart race, in the possibility of a new chapter. But as I drifted to sleep, a small voice whispered, warning me that the man who'd swept me off my feet might not be built to stay steady. I didn't know then that meeting his father would shift everything, showing me a kind of heart Ryan could never match, and setting the stage for a truth that would break us apart. Walking up to Ryan's dad's house in suburban Atlanta felt like stepping into a world I didn't belong in, the kind of place where the air smelled of old money and quiet pride. The red brick house stood 3 stories tall, shaded by ancient oaks, its wide lawn manicured but not flashy, like it knew its worth without screaming it. My stomach churned with nerves as Ryan swung open the gate, his usual carefree stride unbothered. "Relax, Jazelle," he said, flashing that grin that usually melted my doubts. "Dad's gonna love you." I smoothed my blouse, wishing I'd worn something fancier, but I wasn't here to impress. I was here to meet the man who'd shaped Ryan, for better or worse. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and old books, warm but lived in, with family photos lining the walls. Ryan's dad, Charles, waited in a recliner, propped up with pillows, his face kind but etched with fatigue. He wasn't the towering real estate tycoon I'd pictured, just frail, his hands trembling slightly as he waved me over. "Sorry to meet you like this," he said, his voice warm despite the strain. "I'm not as spry as I used to be." I smiled, my nerves easing. "No trouble at all," I said. "It's great to meet you." We hit it off instantly, like old friends catching up. Charles asked about my job, selling software solutions in a tech market that was shifting faster than I could keep up. "Tough business with everyone going cloud-based," he said, his eyes sharp despite his frail frame. "You focusing on integrations or new markets?" I blinked, surprised. Most people glazed over when I talked shop, but he got it. We dove into market trends, and for a moment I forgot I was meeting my future father-in-law. It was like talking to a mentor, someone who saw the gears turning in my head and respected them. Ryan, meanwhile, fiddled with his phone, clearly bored, his foot tapping impatiently. As we left, he muttered, "Dad's stingy. Could have built a mansion, but we're stuck in this place." I frowned, glancing back at the house, bigger than anything I'd ever lived in. How could he call it stingy? But I let it slide, too caught up in Charles's warmth to pick a fight. When Ryan and I got married a few months later, moving into his dad's house made sense. There was plenty of space, and Charles needed help. His health was declining, his steps unsteady without a cane. Ryan had a big idea. He'd quit his sales job to take care of his dad full-time. "I've been a lousy son," he said one night, his voice softer than usual, almost convincing. "Dad's done so much, and I've done nothing. I want to step up, be the homemaker." I was skeptical. Ryan wasn't exactly Mr. Responsible, his wallet still a mess of receipts and loose change. But I admired the sentiment, the flicker of heart I thought I saw. "You sure?" I asked. "You won't miss work?" He shook his head. "I'd regret not doing this more. I can always go back later." My salary was enough for us, and Charles covered his own expenses, so I agreed, hoping Ryan meant it. At first it was almost perfect. I'd come home from long days pitching software to find Ryan cooking dinner. Nothing fancy, just burgers or pasta, but it felt like a home. Charles would share stories about his real estate days, like how he turned a rundown lot into a community center, still standing in downtown Atlanta. He wasn't just a businessman, he cared about people. Funding local charities, mentoring young entrepreneurs. I respected him more with every conversation, and he seemed to see me as more than Ryan's wife. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Jazelle," he'd say, his voice firm. "Don't let my boy drag you down." His words stuck, a quiet warning I didn't fully grasp yet. But the cracks were already showing. Ryan was diligent for maybe a month, vacuuming, grocery shopping, helping his dad with small tasks. Then he got sloppy, sprawling on the couch, scrolling his phone while dishes piled up. "Dinner's handled," he'd say, pointing to a takeout bag. I'd bite my tongue, too tired from work to argue. Charles noticed too, his face tightening whenever Ryan slacked off. One day he pulled me aside in the hallway, his voice low. "I'm sorry, Jazelle," he said. "I thought marriage would straighten him out. He's always been careless." I forced a smile, not wanting to burden him. "It's fine," I lied, but inside I was starting to see Ryan's true colors. His charm was fading, replaced by a laziness that felt like betrayal. Not just of me, but of his dad, who deserved better. As I stood in that big house surrounded by Charles's photos of ribbon cuttings and smiling kids, I felt a shift. This wasn't just Ryan's home. It was a legacy, one he didn't understand. And I was beginning to realize that the man I'd married might never measure up to the father who'd welcomed me like his own. Living with Ryan in that big Atlanta house started to feel like tiptoeing through a minefield. The warmth of Charles's welcome fading under the weight of Ryan's carelessness. I'd come home from grueling days at the office, my throat hoarse from pitching software to clients who wanted miracles on a budget, only to find Ryan sprawled on the couch, surrounded by empty takeout containers, his phone glowing with some sports app. The cedar-scented house, once a haven, felt like a battlefield where I was the only one fighting. I'd cook, clean, do laundry, all while Ryan claimed he was taking care of Dad. But the truth was plain. He'd hired a caregiver to handle Charles's needs, freeing him to do nothing but lounge and spend. At first, I'd believed in his promise to be a homemaker, picturing us as a team, supporting Charles together. But that vision crumbled fast, like the crusty dishes piling up in the sink. One evening, I found a shiny vintage Mustang parked in the driveway, its chrome glinting under the Georgia sun. "Whose car is that?" I asked, my voice sharp as I stepped into the living room, where Ryan was polishing a new set of golf clubs. "Mine," he said, not looking up, like it was no big deal. My jaw dropped. "You got your fancy bathroom from Dad," he added, his tone smug. "I deserve something too." I felt the air leave my lungs. The bathroom wasn't my idea. Charles had overheard me mention a leaky faucet and turned it into a full renovation, complete with a walk-in shower for his mobility. It was practical, a gift for the whole house, not some luxury I'd begged for. But Ryan's car? That was $30,000 of my savings, gone without a word. I checked my bank account that night, my heart pounding as I scrolled through the transactions. Nearly $50,000 in a month, car, golf clubs, designer clothes, a high-end watch. My hands shook as I gripped the laptop. This was the money from Marcus's life insurance, the money meant for a fresh start, not Ryan's personal shopping spree. "You can't just take my savings," I said, slamming the bank statement on the kitchen table, the paper crumpling under my palm. He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Dad's loaded. Once he's gone, we'll be set. What's the big deal?" My stomach churned. He was already counting down to Charles's death, like it was just a pit stop to a jackpot. I wanted to scream, to shake him until he saw how vile he sounded, but I looked at Charles, frail but still so kind, sitting in his recliner across the room, and I stayed put. I couldn't leave him with Ryan, not yet. That night, I took back my bank card, locking Ryan out of my accounts. He didn't even flinch. "Whatever," he said, tossing his phone on the couch. "You'll see, Jazelle, I'm gonna be set." His confidence made my skin crawl, but I held my tongue, focusing on work to keep my sanity. Days blurred into weeks, and Ryan's behavior grew worse. He stopped pretending to help, leaving the caregiver to manage Charles's meals and meds while he ordered gadgets online. A drone, a leather jacket, whatever caught his eye. The house felt heavier, the oak trees outside casting long shadows that mirrored my growing dread. I'd catch Charles watching Ryan, his eyes tight with disappointment, and my heart ached for him. One afternoon, Charles called me into his study, a cozy room lined with photos of community centers and parks he'd built. "Jazelle, you're too good for this," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm sorry Ryan's putting you through this." I brushed it off, not wanting to burden him, but he insisted. "He's always been like this," he sighed. His mom was the same, spent money like it grew on trees. I tried teaching him value, but it never stuck. His words hit hard, confirming what I'd started to see. Ryan wasn't just careless, he was calculating, waiting for a payout he didn't deserve. I forced a smile, but inside, I was reeling. I'd married a man who saw his own father as a means to an end, and me as a stepping stone. The weight of it settled in my chest, but so did a spark of resolve. I wasn't just staying for Charles, I was staying to protect what he stood for, his legacy of kindness and community. As I left the study, the photos on the walls seemed to watch me, Charles's younger self smiling at ribbon cuttings, surrounded by grateful faces. Ryan didn't understand that legacy, but I did. And I was starting to realize that the man I'd married wasn't just failing me. He was failing the one person who'd given him everything. I went back to my laptop, pulling up my budget, determined to hold my ground. Ryan might think he was untouchable, but I was done being his ATM. The truth about his dad's finances was coming, and when it hit, I'd be ready to walk away, stronger than he'd ever expect. The Atlanta house, with its cedar walls and oak-shaded lawn, started feeling like a cage, each creak of the floorboards echoing the tension between Ryan's entitlement and my growing resolve. I'd come home from long days at the office, my eyes stinging from staring at spreadsheets, only to find Ryan lounging in the living room, a new drone buzzing above the coffee table, or a leather jacket slung over a chair. He'd wave off my glares, saying, "Dad's got millions, Jazelle. Relax. His words made my skin crawl, not just for their arrogance, but for how they dismissed Charles, who was fading before our eyes. Charles's health was slipping. His hands shook more, his steps faltered without a walker, but his mind stayed sharp, and his heart sharper. One afternoon he called me into his study, the air thick with the scent of old books and polished wood. "Jazelle, I need your help with something serious," he said, his tone matter-of-fact but heavy. "I'm working on my end-of-life plans. Ryan's not reliable. Can you help me sort it out?" My throat tightened, but I nodded, feeling honored yet weighed down by the responsibility. We spent hours in that study, sunlight filtering through the oaks as he laid out his finances with a clarity that stunned me. Charles had built a real estate empire, but his biggest dream, a community center in East Atlanta to give kids a safe haven, had gone bust. He'd poured millions into it, taking out a massive loan with $500 million of his savings as collateral. If he couldn't repay it, the bank would seize it all. "I planned one last project to cover it," he said, chuckling softly, "but my body's not cooperating." His eyes met mine, steady but tired. "If I don't make it, that collateral's gone. Ryan needs to know." I promised to handle it if the time came, my heart aching at the thought of Charles's dreams unraveling and Ryan's delusion growing. He thought he was inheriting a fortune, but the truth was a ticking clock, and I was the only one who knew it. Back in the house, Ryan's behavior grew uglier, like he sensed his payout was close and didn't need to pretend anymore. He stopped helping entirely, leaving the caregiver to handle Charles's meals, meds, even his trips to the porch. I'd find him sprawled on the couch, ordering gadgets online, his latest obsession, a pair of noise-canceling headphones he didn't need. "Why stressed, Jazelle?" he'd say when I pointed out the dishes piling up or the laundry I was folding after a 10-hour day. "We're set soon enough." I wanted to shake him, to scream that he was betting on a lie, but I kept quiet, remembering Charles's plea to stay steady. Instead, I poured myself into work, closing deals with a ferocity that surprised even my toughest clients. My office, with its view of Atlanta's skyline, became my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe without Ryan's chaos suffocating me. Charles and I grew closer through it all, our talks a lifeline amid the storm. One evening, he told me about that community center, his voice lighting up as he described kids playing basketball, learning to code, dreaming bigger than their circumstances. "It didn't work out," he said, his smile bittersweet. "Lost a fortune, but I'd do it again. It was for something bigger than me." I saw the man behind the money, a dreamer who built for others, not himself. When I mentioned our creaky back porch, he didn't just fix it. He rebuilt it with a ramp for his wheelchair, new decking, turning the yard into a retreat. "Makes it easier for me, and you get to enjoy it too," he said with a wink. Ryan, of course, saw it different. "Why's Dad spending all this money on you?" he snapped one night, slamming a beer bottle on the counter. "I asked for a new TV and he said no, but you get a whole damn porch." I tried explaining it was for Charles's mobility, but he stormed off, muttering about favoritism. Charles overheard and pulled me aside later, his voice heavy. "Ryan's always been like this," he said. "His mom spent money like it was water. I tried teaching him value, but it didn't stick." His disappointment cut deeper than Ryan's tantrums. I wanted to fix Ryan, to make him see the father he was failing, but I was starting to realize some people don't change. Each night, I'd sit on that new porch, the wood cool under my palms, staring at the oaks as fireflies blinked in the dusk. Charles's stories echoed in my mind, his legacy of giving clashing with Ryan's greed. I knew the truth about the $500 million now, and with Charles's health fading, I felt the weight of what was coming. Ryan was dreaming of millions, but the reality would hit like a freight train, and I'd be there when it did, not to gloat, but to walk away free. The day Charles passed away, the Atlanta house lost its heartbeat, the cedar-scented rooms turning hollow without his warm laughter. He was gone just before his 80th birthday, a sudden heart attack stealing him in the night. I sat in the living room, staring at photos on the mantel, Charles cutting a ribbon at a community center, his smile brighter than the Georgia sun. My chest ached, not just for the loss, but for the bond we'd built, the way he'd seen me as more than Ryan's wife, as a friend, a confidant. I was still reeling, my eyes stinging from unshed tears, when Ryan strode in, his face lit up like he'd won the lottery. "Jazelle, we need to talk," he said, his voice dripping with a glee that made my skin prickle. I looked up, expecting a rare moment of grief, maybe a crack in his selfish armor. Instead, he held up a stack of divorce papers and grinned. "Let's get divorced." The words hit like a punch, my breath catching as my mind scrambled to process them. "What?" I whispered, my throat tight, the air in the room suddenly too thick to breathe. He didn't flinch, his hazel eyes cold with triumph. "I checked Dad's account. $500 million, Jazelle. I'm set for life. I don't need you anymore." My blood ran cold as he waved the papers, gloating. "You were just the ATM while I waited for this." The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible, not just for me, but for Charles, whose kindness Ryan was spitting on. He'd married me, played the part of a caring husband, all while counting down to his father's death for a payout he didn't deserve. I thought of Charles's study, the hours we'd spent poring over his plans, his dream of a community center that cost him everything. Ryan hadn't cared about those stories, too busy scrolling his phone, dreaming of millions. My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms, the urge to scream clawing at my throat. I wanted to tell him the truth, that his $500 million was a fantasy, but that quiet voice, Charles's voice, whispered, "Stay steady, Jazelle." I took a shaky breath, my heart pounding as I stared into Ryan's smug face. "Give me the papers," I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the storm inside. He smirked, handing them over like he'd already won. My hand trembled as I signed, the pen scratching against the page, each stroke a release of the weight I'd carried. "File them yourself," I said, tossing the papers back, my voice steady now. "Send my stuff when you're done." I grabbed my purse, the leather cool against my sweaty palm, and walked out, past the oak trees and the manicured lawn I'd once thought was home. My heels clicked on the driveway, each step a mix of rage and relief, the humid air wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. Ryan's chuckle echoed behind me, oblivious to the truth I carried. His father's fortune was locked away, collateral for a dream that failed, and he'd learn it the hard way. As I drove away, the Atlanta skyline blurring through my tears, a sharp laugh escaped me, unexpected and raw. Not because I was cruel, but because justice was already in motion. Ryan thought he'd played me, used my savings to coast until his big score, but he didn't know what I knew. Charles had trusted me with the truth about his finances, the $500 million tied up in a loan he couldn't repay. Ryan's fantasy of wealth was about to collapse, and I wouldn't be there to catch him. I pulled into a hotel near downtown, the neon sign flickering in the dusk, and checked into a room that smelled of clean sheets and second chances. Sitting on the stiff bed, I scrolled through condo listings, my fingers pausing on a midtown place with a balcony overlooking the city. It wasn't just a new home I was searching for. It was a new life, one where I wasn't defined by loss or betrayal. Charles's memory lingered as I unpacked my bag, his kind eyes and stories of community centers a reminder of what mattered. He'd seen me, not as a widow or a wife, but as Jazelle, someone with fire and worth. Ryan's betrayal stung, but it also freed me. I wasn't the broken woman who'd met him 3 years ago, desperate for connection. I was stronger now, shaped by grief and Charles's faith in me. As I lay back, the city lights twinkling outside, I felt a spark of something new. Hope, maybe, or just the quiet thrill of starting over. Ryan would face his reckoning soon, and I'd be far away, building a life that was mine, rooted in the lessons Charles left behind. A few days after I walked out of that Atlanta house, I was holed up in a hotel near downtown, the hum of the city filtering through the window as I scrolled through condo listings, piecing together what my life could be. My phone buzzed, Ryan's name flashing like a warning. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won out. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice cool, like the polished wood of Charles's study. His voice exploded through the line, a storm of panic. "Jazelle, what the hell did you do?" he shouted, so loud I pulled the phone away. He was unraveling, words tumbling over each other, accusing me of sabotaging him. I let him rant, leaning back against the hotel headboard, the city lights flickering outside. "Calm down, Ryan," I said finally. "Tell me what's going on." He was practically hyperventilating. "I went to the bank to pull money from Dad's account, and they said it's locked. There's $500 million, Jazelle. What's happening? I could hear the desperation, his dream of wealth slipping through his fingers like the loose change he never could keep track of. You didn't know, did you? I said, my voice steady, almost soft. Your dad never told you about his business because you never asked. That 500 millions? It's collateral. He sputtered. Collateral? What does that even mean? I took a deep breath, remembering the hours with Charles, his tired eyes explaining his failed dream. Your dad poured everything into that community center in East Atlanta, I said. He wanted to give kids a safe place, but it tanked. He borrowed $500 million, using his savings as collateral. When he got sick, he couldn't start another project to pay it off. The bank gave him a 2-year grace period. But that's up now. The money's gone, Ryan, to settle his debts. Silence stretched on the other end, heavy as the Georgia humidity. You're saying there's nothing? He whispered. $500 million and it's just gone? I nodded, though he couldn't see. There's another account. $75,000, that's your inheritance. His voice broke, a mix of shock and fear. $75,000? I spent everything I had, Jazelle. I thought I'd get millions. I'm broke. I should have felt pity, but all I felt was a quiet vindication, like the oak trees outside Charles's house nodding in agreement. You spent your money and mine, I said, my tone firm. You assumed you'd hit the jackpot, but you never talked to your dad about his plans. You just saw dollar signs. He started to stammer, begging me to help, to pretend the divorce never happened. Please, Jazelle, he said, his voice cracking. You've got savings, a job? I've got nothing. I'm 43, unemployed. I shook my head, the hotel room's stillness grounding me. You made your choices, Ryan. You don't get to lean on me anymore. Figure it out. I hung up, my heart racing but lighter, like a weight had finally lifted. Ryan followed through with Charles's will, sending me $35,000, half his inheritance, probably because fighting over it wasn't worth the hassle. Mutual friends told me he tried going back to sales, but the shock of losing his fantasy fortune broke him. He made mistakes, got chewed out by bosses half his age, and quit after a month. Now he's scraping by as a part-time delivery driver, his savings dwindling with every bad decision. I don't wish him ill, but his troubles aren't mine anymore. I found a cozy condo in Midtown, its balcony overlooking Atlanta's skyline. The city's pulse, a reminder of what's possible. I deposited the $35,000 in my savings, not to spend, but as a tribute to Charles's spirit, his drive, his heart, his belief in doing what matters. Every time I check my account, it's like he's there, cheering me on, telling me to keep going. I'm back to long days at work, pitching software, closing deals with a fire I thought I'd lost. But now I come home to a place that's mine, filled with my own dreams. The grief of losing Marcus, the sting of Ryan's betrayal, they're part of me, but they don't define me. I'm Jazelle, building something new, one step at a time. The city lights twinkle beyond my balcony, softer now as the evening settles, their glow a quiet promise. I think of Charles, his laughter, his stories of building for others, and I feel him here, in the breeze that carries the scent of oak and possibility. I'm not the widow lost in grief or the wife trapped in a lie. I'm just me, standing tall, my hope into whatever comes next. To anyone reading this, who's walked through their own heartbreak and come out stronger, keep going. Your story's still being written, and it's yours to shape.